Looking back, it's crazy to see how far Inti Creates has come. They made an instant splash in the West thanks to the Mega Man Zero and ZX series, as well as Mega Man 9 and 10, revitalized Blaster Master Zero, and created an excellent original sequel, and even created their own 2D action hero in the form of Gunvolt. Not all of their games may be hits, but when they get it right, they're guaranteed to be classics. And that was absolutely the case with Bloodstained Curse of the Moon. Here was a game that was simply viewed as a bonus, a stretch goal for Ritual of the Night's Kickstarter that would harken back to classic Castlevania. And it was fantastic, with some arguing that it was even better than Ritual of the Night. So it was an absolute delight to see, out of nowhere, that Curse of the Moon would be getting a sequel. But could it hold a candle to the original? Curse of the Moon 2 picks up sometime after the first game, with the demon hunter Zangetsu being recruited by a church exorcist, Dominique, to take on a new demon threat. A tower has appeared, calling forth all manner of monster across the countryside. On his journey to the tower, Zangetsu is joined by Dominique and newcomers Robert, an old buddy of Zangetsu, and Hachi, a corgi piloting a steamwork mech and all-around good boy. It's a story that could easily be dismissed as mere set dressing for the gameplay, but there are touches here that I really enjoyed. For one, Zangetsu's character arc has progressed since the first game. There, he was distrustful of everyone and even had the option to kill the extra party members in exchange for new powers. But here, that's not even a consideration, and often it's Zangetsu calming Robert down. One of my favorite additions are the small scenes that play between each level, showing the characters bonding, interacting, and reacting to the scenes around them. It's nothing major, but it helped connect me to this new cast and believe in their friendship when that becomes a plot point in later playthroughs. But let's talk about that gameplay, as much of it is the same as the original. Players still fight through a horde of enemies using both their base weapons and special sub-weapons to get through each challenge. The sub-weapons can only be used if you have enough magic points, which are filled through jars found in lamps. Purple lamps contain different sub-weapons for your character to swap between, while red lamps always contain health. As you recruit more characters, they can be swapped between with the push of a button, making it easy to choose the best character for each challenge, or even keep a run going as they all have separate health bars. However, if one dies, that doesn't mean you lose a life. Instead, that character is no longer selectable until the level is finished or every character has died. If that happens, you'll return to the last candle that was lit in the level and have to try again. At a glance, Curse of the Moon 2 plays almost exactly like the original, but there are differences that help make it stand out, and the most obvious is with the characters. Zangetsu serves as a base once again, controlling exactly as he did in the first game with a simple sword slash and the same sub-weapons. But later on, he gains access to a special sword that expands his moveset to include the abilities from the first game, granting a 3-hit combo, an arcing slash, and, new to this game, powered up sub-weapons. He's nothing special on his own, but reliable in almost every situation. Next is Dominique, who wields a lance, allowing her to attack vertically, as well as granting a Scrooge McDuck-like bounce off of enemies. It doesn't hit hard and can be tricky to control, but it can also be used in conjunction with her higher jump to reach new areas above or cross gaps. More remarkable is that Dominique can find a special sub-weapon in every level that allows her to revive all dead party members at once. It's a fantastic tool, but it also encouraged me to keep her out of the action once I had it so I wouldn't lose the option. Continuing on, Robert is a sniper, making him great at taking down enemies from afar. However, his attack rate is rather slow, and his bullets can't pass through walls unlike the other characters' weapons. He's also able to crawl and perform a wall jump like in Mega Man X, allowing for some unique attack options. His sub-weapons help make up for his slow attack rate with a good deal of coverage, but I only used him at specific times due to his abysmally low health. But Hachi is by far my favorite of the new characters. In his mech suit, Hachi is a literal tank, able to absolutely destroy spikes and negate them as a hazard. But this isn't something that comes up a lot, likely due to the fact that he can do this. Hachi is also able to hover for a short time, which saved me more times than I care to admit, and a stomp that decimates enemies below. He also hits the hardest with his punch, though it doesn't have the best range. However, that became less of an issue thanks to Hachi's ability. He can make himself completely invincible for as long as you have magic, which does drain quickly. But I was still able to power through gauntlets or even ignore boss attacks to just continually lay on the pain. Hachi's not fast by any means, but it hardly seemed to matter as he became my go-to character in combat. It's a solid lineup, and certainly more original than the first game where each character was a twist on someone from Castlevania. They also felt more balanced, despite my preference for Hachi. There was always a situation that best suited one of them, which kept the gameplay kinetic and engaging. It helps that the branching pathways of each level return as well, adding a little exploration and rewarding the curious with permanent health, magic, attack, and defense boosts to your party. While nothing is too radically different from the original on an initial playthrough, there are plenty of small changes to be appreciated. One is that there is now a window at the top right of the screen indicating your lives and point total, but rather than a number, a bar fills toward the next life earned. There's something I found oddly satisfying about filling that bar, making each life earned feel like a real reward. New enemies have been added to Curse of the Moon 2 as well, many of which weren't even in Ritual of the Night, which helps give the game more of its own identity. But it's the bosses that are the true standout, with amazing designs and clever patterns to figure out. I don't think there's a weak one in the bunch, but this leads to another new touch. If a character dies during the boss battle, the damage done to it by the surviving members will still be there. So if I wailed on it with Zangetsu, then switched to Robert, who then dies, Zangetsu's damage will remain. Alternatively, if I fought exclusively as Zangetsu and died, then I'd have to start from square one. It's a system that encourages changing up the party, or at least paying attention to who's about to die, that I really appreciated. But one of the more notable additions is the local co-op, which can be activated at any time during gameplay. This will spawn a second Blue Zangetsu for the second player, allowing both to play as the swordsman. However, no other characters can be shared, meaning that there won't be two Hachis or Roberts. The pool of magic is also shared, though the amount held is given a slight boost. Otherwise, nothing else is really changed within the mode. It is possible to jump and ride on each other to reach higher areas, but it's mostly a way to enjoy the game with a friend and maybe take on the challenge together. That said, bosses can be a bit trickier if one player doesn't know the pattern. I think it's a fun option, but the game feels built more for a single player, though I do wish online play was available. Others might get more use out of the multiplayer simply due to how much more difficult Curse of the Moon 2 is compared to the original. That game certainly had tough moments, but nothing that ever required me to retry more than a handful of times. The sequel is much tougher with its enemy layouts and bosses, especially in veteran mode where knockback is on. It is possible to turn on casual mode and get rid of the knockback, but I persevered and found a challenging but not unfair game. It really does feel like a step up in quality while keeping what worked, and that includes the multiple playthroughs. It only took me 3 hours to complete the game's 8 levels, but that's only episode 1. After that, episode 2 is unlocked, which takes away a certain character, increasing the difficulty of that second playthrough. Now, this might sound repetitious, but the way the game is structured makes it so you're seeing different locations each time you play. New routes can be seen in the early levels, while a limitation is put on one of the characters to make the later levels feel different as well. It's a wonderful balance, and I was loving the game from top to bottom. But then came the next episode, and this is where things started to falter. In all, Curse of the Moon 2 has 4 different playthroughs, but it's the final one that's the most notable. That said, its structure could also be considered a spoiler because it did catch me by surprise. However, before diving into that, I want to talk about the process of unlocking it. Episode 2 actually has a good and bad ending, and I'll say this right now, go for the bad ending. The good ending immediately unlocks the final episode, which is great, but there was obviously another mode that needed to be unlocked. That is done by getting the bad ending, which unlocks the EX episode, where the allies of the first game join Zangetsu once again. Once that's completed, the final episode will be unlocked as well. And that's the problem. If I want to see everything when going for episode 2's good ending, I have to beat the game 5 times, whereas if I go for the bad ending, it's only 4. As much as I enjoy this game, that extra playthrough feels a bit much. So let's talk about the final episode, and we'll place a time here to skip to if you want to remain surprised. If you're still here, then let's dive into my biggest issue with Curse of the Moon 2. Because, on paper, this sounds like an awesome final mode. In it, a new threat appears, and all the characters from both games team up to find parts in order to take it on, which means playing through 7 of the levels once again. The difference is that they can be selected in any order, and the level you play has a set ally. finish that level, and that partner will join you permanently, allowing the player to eventually swap between a whopping 7 characters. However, due to the fact that it's not linear, this also messes with the difficulty curve as the later levels are not made easier. So there were times when I was fighting with far worse stats than normal because I needed characters in order to replay stages I already beat in order to search for the stat upgrades hidden in those levels. It's a really cool idea and concept, but I found myself facing a brick wall as I played the same stages over and over again in the hope of discovering something new or actually beating the bosses this time around. It is brutal and mind-numbing at the same time, which is such a shame because I was truly loving Curse of the Moon 2 up until that point. Now, it is possible to head for the final challenge before recruiting all the allies and obtaining all the parts, but it makes it so much harder. It all feels like a gameplay loop designed to beat you down. It sucks that happened at the end, but it doesn't fully take away the great things that came before. And there's no denying that the game's style still holds up and leads to a lot of creativity both in terms of level and boss design. The build up to certain bosses where they can be seen moving in the background caught me off guard the first time, and the sprite work for them is outstanding. It really comes across as an advanced NES game. The same could be said of the music. While nothing stands out as memorable as the original Curse of the Moon, there are still some great tunes here that match the first game's vibe, and I found myself enjoying them more each time I came back to a level. Curse of the Moon 2 is essentially more of the first game with improved tweaks and a new character lineup. And that's honestly all it needed to be. I enjoyed it more than the first and love seeing Zangetsu's character progression. It also felt like a step up to make it slightly more of its own thing rather than completely homaging Castlevania. The multiple playthroughs give it an identity. It's just unfortunate that the final episode fell apart in trying something new. Still, I like this game a lot and easily recommend it to any fan hoping to get more of a challenge. It's certainly going to give it to you. Thanks for watching and be sure to subscribe to GameXplain for more on Bloodstained and other things gaming.